Hello, this is Mr. Ferris. I just wanted to go through a homework problem real quick because it's a little bit different and a little hard to understand the first time you go through it. This is problem number 24 in chapter 13. It's the divide and choose method, and you see a picture of it here. Suppose Bob, Carol, and Ted are viewing a cake, and the cake has 18 units of value. Well, before we get to that, let's imagine a piece of cake sitting at, I don't know, maybe a wedding, and there's one piece left, and you and somebody else are going to want to take this piece of cake and divide it fairly. And let's say that, as sometimes happens, maybe this is a corner piece, and so there's all this fluffy icing along these two sides. And you're going to use the divide and choose method. The divide and choose method says basically that one person divides, the other person chooses. So let's say the person that cuts the cake decides to cut it like this. So you've got now, from the cutter's perspective, the cutter thinks that both of these halves are equal. They don't see any difference between cutting this piece and cutting this piece. Well, someone that likes icing, on the other hand, might say, oh my goodness, from my perspective, this piece on the left is way more valuable because there's way more icing along the edge there. So you can see that the same piece of cake can have two different values based on a person's personal perspective. So even though one person may think that this cake was cut exactly in half, the other person may value the left half more than the right half. So that's an example of a piece of cake being cut. So what the textbook company has done is they've given you a little different metaphor here. They're now saying that from Bob's perspective, the piece of cake looks like this. In other words, it's equally value all the way across. It's got equal value all the way across. Carol, when she looks at this piece of cake, she sees way more value on this side of the piece than on this side of the piece. And Ted, when he looks at the same piece now, he's looking at the same piece, he just sees more value on the left side than on the right side, much like a piece of cake that might have icing on one side and not the other. So now what we want to do is see, how do we solve this problem that they're asking us? So down here at the bottom in part A, it says Bob and Carol are going to use the divide and choose method. So Ted is really not part of the deal here. On part A, Ted is kind of not part of the deal, so we'll just take him out of it. We're just going to take Bob and Carol, and we're going to use the divide and choose method. And they ask how big of a piece do they think they're getting. And now we notice, too, we have to read this, that Bob is the divider. So if Bob is going to divide this piece of cake that he believes is worth 18 units, and he's going to cut it vertically, fairly, why, he's going to cut it right down the middle, which is about right in there, if I can draw it carefully. That's where Bob cuts it, and if you count the squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2 halves makes 9 on one side. And 1, 2, 3, well, I'll count from this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 2 halves makes 9 on this side. So from Bob's perspective, when he looks at the piece of cake, he has cut it perfectly fairly into 9 and 9. However, this is the same place, this is the same cut. As Carol views the cake, the cut goes right through there. Now, from her perspective, she can see, at least she believes, that, wow, this piece is way more valuable on this side than on this side. In fact, if you count the value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 2 halves, the right part of this piece is way more valuable to Carol than the left side. The left side only has a value of 6. So from Bob's perspective, well, let's start with Carol, because Carol's going to choose. Can you tell which one Carol's going to choose? Well, of course, she's going to choose the right side. So she will pick the right side, and then she will give the left side to Bob. So from Carol's perspective, she's getting a value of 12, which she believes is more than her fair share. Bob, on the other hand, believes he's getting exactly his fair share. So if we answer the question here, how large a piece will each receive? Carol receives a piece she believes is worth 12. Bob receives a piece that he believes is worth 9. That's the general procedure. I will let you go ahead and do part B. You'll have to kind of start over. In fact, in this in this case, it's Carol and Ted they're going to choose, so Bob is kind of out of the picture. So you just want to use the bottom two pictures and do that same thing. And this time, of course, it says Carol is the divider. So when Carol cuts, she's going to cut that into 2 9s, and then you should be able to figure out then what Ted would pick and what he believes he is getting. I hope that clears that up, because you're going to have more homework problems with these kinds of diagrams, and of course that will come up on quizzes and tests. So that's kind of the metaphor and how you deal with it in a textbook or homework or quiz problem. If you have any questions, you can ask them in class. I'll see you then.